Welcome everyone to the Skin of Color Society's Dermatology Diversity Task Force Town Hall. We're thrilled to welcome over 400 of you here tonight. I'm Dr. Jeanette Okoye. I'm a professor of dermatology and the department chair at Howard University, and I will be your moderator tonight. First, let's do some housekeeping. Due to the size of the group, we've set the meeting so that all microphones are muted. Please use the chat function to ask your questions. We will be keeping a close eye on the chat throughout the evening, and we will get to your questions in the second half of the program. You may choose which view you prefer in the upper right corner of your screen. If you use gallery view, you'll see thumbnails of all the participants. And if you do the speaker view, you will see the person who's speaking on a larger screen. We are recording this call, and the recording will be available on the Skin of Color Society website, which is skinofcolorsociety.org. If by chance there are any technical issues that are insurmountable and we are forced to end the call early, we will of course send you an email communication explaining any follow-up and perhaps even if we needed to reschedule. Hopefully that won't happen though. After the program, please feel free to share your comments or feedback by email at info@skinofcolorsociety.org. So before I introduce our panelists, I just want to give you a little basis for the feedback, for the format of this evening's program. So for the first 20 minutes or so, we will address some of the questions that we received from you in advance. When we reviewed those questions, there seemed to be several themes that were quite common. These were mentorship, potentially having a plan B or strategies for reapplication, how our specialty is actively addressing diversity, the characteristics of a successful applicant, as well as tips for medical students for interviews and rotations. So our goal in the first half is to address these very specific and broadly applicable questions. And then we will open up for general Q&A. And for this, we will be looking in the chat box for your questions. So I would like to now introduce our esteemed panelists. Our first panelist tonight is Dr. Crystal Algu. She is an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University. We also have Dr. Sucharita Bowers, an assistant professor of dermatology from Southern Illinois University. We also have Dr. Candace Heath, an assistant professor of dermatology from Temple University. Dr. Lauren Krieger, an assistant professor of dermatology from Emory University. And we have Dr. Kanade Shinkai, who is a professor of dermatology and is the editor-in-chief of JAMA Dermatology, and she is from the University of California, San Francisco. And finally, we also have Dr. Michael Wall, who is chief resident at the University of California, San Francisco. None of our panelists have any financial disclosures that are relevant to this evening's proceedings. And as they answer your questions, they will take a couple minutes to give you a little bit more information and background about themselves. So let's get into it. You all had really insightful questions about our specialty. We can't wait to share some of our advice with you. So the first question that seemed to permeate in the registration box was, how is the specialty of dermatology addressing the issue of diversity? Would any of our panelists like to take this on?
Thanks, Dr. Okoye. Hi, I am Sucharita Bowers. Like Dr. Okoye said, I'm at the SIU School of Medicine in Springfield, Illinois. That's 3 hours south of Chicago, and I'm the program director there. I've been faculty now almost 6 years, and I'm also the Department of Internal Medicine Vice Chair for Health Equity. And I have the privilege of being part of the Association of Professors of Dermatology, which is the academic group that represents dermatology program directors, associate program directors, and other program leadership. And we have recently this year formed a program director task force which is a subgroup of several program directors within the larger APD group that is very intentionally doing a deep dive into all aspects of our application process for dermatology. And so one of the big themes that we are looking at as far as this year's, not just this year's, but even moving forward, is how is our application process exclusive, and how are we, how do we need to make it more inclusive, and how do we enhance diversity in dermatology throughout our programs, and take advantage of the whole application process to help us do that. So we have the program director task force is actually led by two other program directors, Dr. Alana Roseman and Dr. Courtney Schott. We are, several of us are actually, what they've done is they've divided the task force into different subcommittees. And so the subcommittees are taking a look at various aspects of the application process, such as holistic review, application transparency, interviews, etc. And we've had a lot of discussions and planning and documents and meetings in terms of how do we really revise our application process to enhance diversity in dermatology. And this is happening simultaneously as a lot of things I think are changing in academic medicine. I think you've all heard obviously about step 1 going to pass fail, January 2022. There's a lot more focus, I think, both because of COVID and as well as some of the recent events that have been happening across our country around social justice and equity, and really highlighting racism and anti-racism efforts. So I think we are trying to take advantage of the momentum of the moment in academic dermatology and really trying to highlight how do we help with equity in dermatology. So our program director task force is one way. Also, there are many programs across the country who have already been working on curriculum around equity and diversity inclusion. Many programs, if not all, have some component of diversity, inclusion, equity committees or groups with leaders that are working on those efforts. And I'm part of a group of very talented individuals who have been working on equity efforts in dermatology, and we're trying to cull together an equity curriculum. The Skin of Color Society under Dr. Susan Taylor's leadership has a work group specifically dedicated to improving diversity in dermatology, as well as an equity curriculum and a skin of color curriculum. So I think that there's multiple things happening right now that are in flux and that are, happening like currently in progress. And I think that sometimes the challenge is that when so many groups are working on many things, it's hard to know, what's going to happen, and how is it going to help me, and how is this going to really change. And I want to tell all of you that are on that I think we've had the spotlight really shown on inequity in America, and I think that we really are trying to kind of come together and really produce some meaningful change in academia, and hopefully the whole idea of this will translate down the pipeline to ultimately get the diversity that we want to see in our specialty.
Thank you, Dr. Bowers. Would anyone else from the panel like to comment on this really important question?
Yeah, I'd like to speak what's happening from the perspective of the specialty workforce. So the American Academy of Dermatology is sort of the governing body of dermatology as a specialty, and the AD certainly represents or certainly recognizes the lack of diversity in dermatology, which has been raised as a priority, especially under Henry Lim's presidency in 2017 for the organization. And I think he has really stimulated a lot of really wonderful changes that are really evolving. Each one is evolving in a wonderful way, including the establishment of a diversity task force. There is actually, for many years now, there's been a mentorship program for underrepresented students to pair with mentors who can work with them and get to know them and help support them in their exploration of the specialty as a career. A very new idea is the Diversity Champion Workshop, which was had its inaugural year last year. Amit Pandya was involved in that. I see he's on the call tonight. And this year is being led by Rebecca Vasquez and Kanya Ferguson to create a space for medical educators in dermatology to come together, to exchange ideas. And the real two priorities for that workshop are to think about ways that we can improve the interview process, think about ways that we select the best residents, and thinking about diversity and representation, and thinking about how we can increase cultural competency amongst training programs and within academic departments. So these are all very important initiatives. There's many other wonderful partners in this work. The SNMA has also created a mentorship list where they've basically sent emails out to many of the program directors and other medical educators in dermatology to see who is willing to be a mentor for an underrepresented student. So I would definitely try to check out that resource, because that would be a great resource if some of you on the call might be looking for mentorship. These are ways to connect. So lots of different options and things that are growing that I hope will really improve the field.
Thank you.
Dr. Shinkai, I'll just add to your comment about mentorship from the APD side. I think coming soon, there will be a document that will be available to all medical students, a Google document, which will have some contact information about mentorship. And we recognize throughout dermatology that mentorship is a really huge component, really critical to the foundation of improving diversity, inclusion, equity in dermatology. And that's mentorship all around, whether you're a student, a resident, a faculty member, or, no matter where you are in your station of life in your career. So that specific mentorship contact information and who's available to be a mentor, that will be coming in this Google document that will be being put out by the APD very, very soon. So just, keep your eye out for that.
Thank you both. It is an exciting time to be applying in dermatology. We're really on the cusp of change. And I think it's the culmination of years of work, people behind the scenes, and sort of this national interest in equity and changing the landscape. And it's just a great time. Piggybacking off of what you mentioned about mentorship, Dr. Bowers, we received several questions asking about ways that students could find a dermatology mentor. Some specifically were asking how they would go about finding a URM mentor in dermatology. I wonder if one of you would address this.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm happy to answer that. So I'm Crystal Agu, like Dr. Quay mentioned. I'm an assistant professor of dermatology at Johns Hopkins. I'm also the director of the Ethnic Skin Program, involved in a lot of research, and happen to be the co-chair of the Mentorship Committee of Skin and Color Society. And we definitely get that question a lot. And one of the things that's really hard is, especially for people who are really interested in URM mentors, in academic medicine, our numbers are very few. We're hoping to grow them. So hopefully many of you on the chat will join academic medicine. But in the meantime, I've gotten this question, and people have asked about like the utility of cold calling or cold emailing mentors. And I will say in my experience, it doesn't tend to work that well, just because of the sheer number of how many of you guys are so enthusiastic and really take initiative, and it's super awesome. But I can speak for myself and possibly other people on the panel that it can feel so difficult to get back to each and every one of you who really, really needs and wants this mentorship. So as you are searching for a mentor, some things that I would recommend. One, I think it's easiest to connect with a mentor, especially an outside institution, through a mentor at your current institution. So because if I get 10 emails a week requesting mentorship, which is not unusual, which can add up to 500 requests a year, something is going to stand out a little bit more if, let's say, Dr. Okoye says, hey, I have this awesome med student and she's really interested in hair loss and she'd really like to talk to you. Well, that is going to be something that stands out to me more than a name from an institution that I don't recognize. But what I do think is great about cold emailing is that sometimes, even if I didn't get the chance to respond to your email, when your application lands on my desk, I may remember that name and say, oh God, did that person email me? So I will say, that being said, it's because a lot of faculty are so overwhelmed, they can't get back to everyone, but having that mentorship connection can be helpful. The other thing I would say is don't get caught up on having a URM mentor, okay? Because there are so many people, and I can speak from personal experience, who are so willing and looking forward to reaching out and mentoring as many people as possible. And you don't even necessarily have to have a mentor that's in dermatology. An excellent mentor is really going to be able to provide you advice no matter what specialty you go into. And a really good mentor wants to see you succeed, even if you don't follow their path. And so if, I wouldn't want to see people feel like they're, I'll call myself out, they're like, I emailed Dr. Agu, she didn't respond, so I don't have a mentor. I really would encourage you to seek out mentors around you. Your PEDS clerkship director could be the greatest mentor you've ever had, and can really help navigate you through the process. Because a lot of the pearls that we give about our specialty and applying in dermatology really do apply widely to other specialties as well.
Thank you, Dr. Agu, and I feel very strongly about this as well. I think there's great value in peer mentorship. So not only are faculty great mentors for you, but your colleagues are great mentors for you, those who've gone before, but even people at your level. The peer mentorship networks really allow for information sharing. You may have information that someone else doesn't, and vice versa. They have networks that you don't have. So don't discount mentorship from your own peers. And some of my best mentors have been older white men. Jerry Lazarus, Peter Heald, Rick Edelson, I will call them by name. Without many of these people, I really wouldn't be here. So you never know who's gonna be that champion for you. But speaking of mentorship, I think that's a two-way street. And I think that there are ways to be a great mentee that will facilitate that relationship and perhaps make things a little bit easier for you to find a mentor. Would anyone like to address that one? How do you?
Question.
Right.
Yes. I am Dr. Candace Heath, Assistant Professor of Dermatology at Temple here in Philadelphia. I am also boarded in pediatrics and pediatric dermatology as well. So some of my comments will later on will hopefully highlight some of you who are not traditional candidates. And I also co-chair the SOX Mentorship Committee along with Dr. Agu. So thank you so much for being here. So I love being a mentee, and I also love mentoring. We all need mentors. But in order to be a great mentee, some of the things that I've learned along the way is that you have to be open and honest. In order for someone to help you or give you great advice, you really should keep an open mind and be willing to share with them. Of course, it may not happen on the first time you meet the person, but over time, you definitely should share be comfortable sharing things, about your life, about your application, about some of the ups and downs, some of your positives and negatives. And that is definitely going to help that person be able to mentor you better. Also, you should come into the mentee-mentor relationship asking, what can I do to help you out that I can learn from along the way? So by asking that question, you are lightening the load of your mentor by helping with something that they already have on your plate, their plate, and you get to learn about something new, and maybe a project idea or a paper or something like that can come from it, or even learning how to do a proper literature search. Even if that is, you're not going to be part of writing this massive grant or something, just actually being able to, someone giving you the practice to be able to do something like that, that is very helpful for you and can be used later on as an example. Also, keep track of what you talk about. Like Dr. Agus gave you a great example of how many requests we receive for mentorship. So from meeting to meeting, I always tell my mentees, please take notes. I think at the beginning they think it's like funny or something. I say, no, this is serious. Please take notes because I often have great ideas. I don't remember them when we talk again. So you need to have notes. And at the end, you will leave with homework, things that you're going to work on. And we set a follow-up date. And then we have further discussion. So make it easy. Make it easy to mentor you. That's one of the biggest tips. And also remember that your mentor is a human being with multiple responsibilities. Give them some slack. You know, if they don't follow up right away, or you ask them for something and it's taking a little long, send a gentle email reminder. Do not be annoying and email them multiple times a day, every single day, that kind of thing. Then that you become more of an annoyance than a helper. Remember, you want to be in the role of how can I make your life easier and learn along the way, right? So if you go into any mentee or mentor relationship with that in mind, you really can't go wrong.
Thank you. Those are some really good pearls, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Heath. So in our final few minutes of this portion, I'd like to address one of the common questions that we got, which is, what are the characteristics of a successful dermatology applicant? Anyone?
That's an excellent question. I'd be happy to take it. So I'm Lauren Krieger. I'm an assistant professor at Emory, associate program director for the residency program there, as well as the ambassador for diversity, equity, and inclusion there. And I work on the SOX Diversity in Action task force. So I think this question is definitely near and dear to my heart, as I am a recent resident, just finished about a year and a half ago now. So definitely hope I can help you with this question. So I think at baseline, one of the things that's important is you have to aim for academic excellence, right? So I think we kind of know that it's in the back of everyone's mind. Derm is thought to be very competitive. And in Derm, we're all lifelong learners. So academic excellence is really important. And what does that really look like? So traditionally, it's looked like, you know, step 1 scores, step 2 scores, how are your grades on your clerkship rotations? What's your dean's letter look like? And those things are still important, although I will say we are definitely transitioning to a more holistic application review. And that's thanks to a lot of the work that SOX has done, Dr. Shanghai and Dr. Bauer have all spoken on. So some programs may have cutoffs for STEP. There are others that may not. There are some programs that are doing a more holistic review, and that's because definitely we're transitioning away from STEP 1 and 2 and grades and AOA, because many medical schools will no longer offer those to us in application review, right? So STEP 1 will be no longer available soon. So I want to offer a tidbit of advice when it comes to academic excellence. So if you have an extenuating circumstance that resulted in a score that you were not necessarily happy with, then I think it is okay for you to ask a mentor to explain that, perhaps in a letter. So if something came up with a family member, someone got really ill, it's definitely okay for a close mentor who's a letter writer to explain that in their letter. Something else that we really look for is empathy. Right? So we want to know that you will take care of patients well, that you will commit to service, be a servant leader. So how does that translate in an application for derm residency? So really, are you committing to a service activity consistently over a period of time, right? So not just something that you decided to do right before application season, but consistently committed to serving an underserved population or education, something like that. And a tidbit I would give is definitely be honest when you're filling out that application about your commitment, the time that you spent doing it, the number of hours that you spent on that. That's important for you to be forthcoming with that. We're also looking for innovation, research. So what have you done that shows that you're organized and a self-starter? Right? So, you know, oftentimes residency will offer a small research project during residency. We want to know if you have skills like literature review, statistics, those kind of things. Those are skills that are definitely assets, and they're outside of just academic excellence, right? You offer something unique, innovative to our program. And a tidbit I'd give for that is if you have a research mentor, one way to remain engaged, especially in the era of COVID, is I ask for my mentees to send a weekly check-in email. So not necessarily one that they would expect me to respond to, Just one that says, hey, Dr. Krieger, just wanted to let you know I worked on such and such. It was a good week for me. My exam was also this week. That lets me know they're committed to our relationship. I know they're timely, and it keeps me in the loop about where things are. And we also want a diversity of thoughts and experiences for a derm applicant, right? So be honest and open with who you are. One of the best pieces of advice I got was be honest about your interest in skin of color on your application. They want to know that you're perhaps a jack of all trades, but not a master of none, right? There's something that drives you. And what is that? Capture that in your application. And I think Dr. Shinkai, I also have heard her say, you want to think about your missions and values as a doctor and convey how that translates to how you will be as a dermatologist. Is that right, Dr. Shinkai? Okay, awesome. And that is so important for what's important with a derm resident, right? We wanted someone who is committed to teamwork, a self-starter and curious intellectually, someone who's responsible and responsive, and also flexible. So COVID will be a challenge for anyone who's interviewing this season. It's definitely going to be a challenge. Be flexible, be respectful of those who are sending emails, be patient if you get caught up in a breakout room during your interviews, showing that you're still courteous in those moments where things are so uncertain. That speaks a lot to your character and your maturity.
Thank you, Dr. Krieger. Dr. Wall, we don't want you to feel left out. So I'm going to ask you a very specific question, and then we'll transition into the more open Q&A. And my question for you as a current resident, as a chief resident at UCSF, what advice do you have for medical students for their interviews, especially this virtual format, as well as for rotations?
Thank you, Dr. Okoye. So as Dr. Okoye said, I'm a chief resident at UCSF Dermatology. I'm happy to be on this call and happy to see so many faces of medical students who I have had on my service so far this year and last year as well. So great to see you all. I think when it comes to interviewing, so this year will be a little bit different. Most likely all interviews will be by Zoom or by some video format, and I think that presents unique challenges. But I think before we consider that, I think sort of the fundamentals of good interviewing are the first things that we need to master. So that comes with practice. So once you're at the interview stage, someone or many people have read your application. They want to see who you are. They want to know more about you. They want to sort of have what is written on the page come to life in front of them. And so at that point, they are interested to see if you are sort of a good fit for their program. So you really want your personality to shine through. You want to put a face to all the positive things in your application. And while that doesn't always come, I think, second nature to many people, you have to sort of practice to really get that to come through. So I'd recommend meeting with friends, having them pose questions to you, meeting with mentors, meeting with current dermatology residents who might remember the kinds of questions that they received when they were applying, and have them pose questions to you, put you on the spot. That is your time to mess up, to rephrase your questions, think about how you want to put things together before the real thing happens. And in thinking of the sort of questions that you want to practice as well, think about the different styles that different programs have. So some programs might ask questions that are more scenario-based. They might say, tell me about a time when you had a difficult encounter with a patient. How did you overcome that? Try to figure out what question style that program has. And you can figure that out by perhaps reaching out to some of the residents who are there, who interviewed recently and know the sort of types and styles of questions that the panel will ask, so you're more prepared to answer those questions. There are a few things that you always have to prepare for. So you need to have, some sort of 30-second spiel that is the tell me about yourself spiel that says who you are, a bit of where you're from, why you're interested in dermatology. You need to have that sort of down pat by the time your first interview comes about. A little bit of practical experience that I found useful when I was applying. I tried to, if possible, programs that you're really interested in, try to have them interview sort of midway through your season. You're bound to be very nervous those first few times. I remember my first interview didn't go very well at all. I was fumbling over my words, trying to figure out how to sort of put my best foot forward and phrase things in the best way, but it was good practice so that when I got to other programs where I knew I really wanted to shine, I had made those mistakes and I was more prepared to sort of do a better job. Another thing that you can do is to check the websites of these departments that you're interviewing with. Try to find something to connect with. Is there someone who's doing research in an area that you have done research in? Is there something about the sort of value of the department that resonates with you that you can say, you know, one of the things that really interests me about UCSF or Harvard or Yale or Howard or UT Southwestern is the fact that you are working on XYZ, and I find that to be interesting, and I've also done some work on that. I think that really shows that you're engaged and that you can add some value to the program.
Thank you, Dr. Wall. I seriously doubt that you were fumbling over your words in your first interview, but okay.
Yeah, I also like to say, now I'm trying to mentally remember if you did our interview early or mid-cycle, because now I feel slighted, but I don't know. I think we're still good. We're still good.
All right, I think we heard from each of you at least once. I'd like to transition to the questions that are showing up in the chat. They're also quite insightful. The first one that I see here is from Dr. Obayomi. Hi, Ronke, how are you? And her question is, since away rotations are not possible this year for many students, what do you recommend programs do to make an equitable residency interview process? Her concern, like many of us, is that because there are no aways or chances to shine in person, programs are going to default to the students that they may have had more direct contact with, which could exclude URM students in many cases. Please, any of you.
Oh, I think you're still on mute.
Oh, you didn't hear any of that I said?
No, it was me. I was on mute. No, thank you. That's a really good question. And we've talked about this a lot in the APD group and within our program director task force. And there's a couple of things that we're doing. Number one, I think that many programs, if not most, are doing some type of virtual meet and greet setting, whether it's an informational 1-hour informational session or a series of sessions. And it's hard to know when everyone's meet and greets are going to be. So that is also going to be on that Google document that will come out here very soon. That document will have which programs are doing meet and greets, when they're doing it, when interviews are going to be planned for, which ones have virtual rotations or virtual electives, and then of course mentorship opportunities. So that's going to be on there. The other thing that will happen in these virtual meet and greets, and I think the meet and greets are going to be structured differently. Some programs are planning to do very just broad informational sessions, get to know our program, say hi, here's the faculty, here are the residents. I believe some programs are electing to do a deeper dive, not necessarily a virtual elective per se, but more deeper dive into this is how our program works, here's how our didactics works, here's our clinicals, etc. Some programs across the country who are doing virtual electives are doing like just participation in virtual didactics. So you can participate in our grand rounds or our Kodachromes or our faculty-led lectures. Most programs who are doing virtual electives are doing it that way, and there's not going to be a lot of patient care just because of the the HIPAA issues related with that and the complex nature of that. Of course, this is all really different than being able to interact one-on-one with programs. I mean, that's just the whole nature of all of this is very, very different. And I think that what I think this situation is going to bring out to the forefront is, do we really need away rotations? I mean, I think that these are some valid questions that we ask. I mean, even the whole concept of away rotations, one could argue that those rotations are not equitable at all. I mean, not everybody can go to away rotations, and even when they do go to away rotations, there's such a concentration of who can get to what program and what students are excluded. And then of course you have the whole VSAS dilemma and how that works. So I really think that even though the initial feeling is, wow, this is going to be really a big barrier for people getting to know applicants, programs getting to applicants and vice versa, I honestly wonder if what we'll learn is that there are better ways that we can get to learn our applicants, or applicants can get to learn programs, and we don't necessarily need an away rotation to do that. And so that's one big thing that's happening. And I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting everything.
Dr.
That's
Barr,
probably the biggest thing.
I totally agree. I actually think this can even the playing field
Yeah.
for many students. So this is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yes, sorry, and just before we move on, so as Dr. Bowers was mentioning about the list that will come out, so I think if you go to derminterest.com, which is the Dermatology Interest Group website, they will eventually have access or at least share when the APD will be sending that out. So also ask, if you do not hear from it, or hear about it soon, ask your PD or ask your derm interest group. And another way to creatively do this is if you're comfortable, go to their Instagram or Twitter page, because a lot of programs are posting when their virtual open house will be on their Instagram or Twitter or even website, right? So if you have a few programs that you're particularly interested in, you can always check those social media and websites for their dates. And they are coming up.
And I do want to add one other thing in response to the whole equitable application process. The other thing that is being recommended this year is that there is a cap on accepting interviews. There's some data to show that after you get 12 or so interviews, your return on additional interviews isn't that helpful. So what we're trying to do with the APD is limit how many interviews people take so that there's more interview spots to go around for everybody, and really encouraging applicants, once you've hit 15 interviews that you've accepted, can you not take any more interviews so that we have more interview spots available for everybody? And some of these questions are going to have different opinions. Certainly, I mean, there's going to be opinions across the board on how many, should I not apply to programs after 40? One of the other things we're suggesting is limiting how many programs you apply to. And I think that that is met with a lot of uncertainty on the side of applicants who are like, but I want to increase my odds of, getting into dermatology. I really want to apply to 80 programs. So I do think that I don't have all the right answers, but some of the things that we're recommending from the program director side of things is to really think about, students applying to 80, 90 programs and accepting 20 interviews, and if that really does harm us as far as equitable application process goes.
All right.
Thank you. I really appreciate those answers. But something I was also wondering about is I've had some medical students approach me and ask me about I noticed all these programs are having these open houses. Like, if I don't go to them, are people going to note this and be like, oh, they're not actually interested?
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, before we answer that, thank you so much for that question. We still will direct all questions to the chat just so everyone feels like they get a fair shake. I know that we wanted the follow-up question, but I don't want to encourage people to continue to ask questions via video, via audio. All right.
Should I go ahead and answer that?
Yes, well, that was
Okay.
Ronke, and it was her question that started this train. So
Yeah.
Let's continue.
No, that's a really good question. I've actually heard that posed by other faculty as well. And the idea of the meet and greet is actually most programs are not requiring registration, because the whole idea is if we start having registration, number one, it's very burdensome for everybody involved. But number two, the whole idea of the meet and greet is supposed to be an extra way to learn about programs beyond the website. If people should wish to do that, if programs should wish to offer that for the benefit of applicants. But I think we're realizing that, oh my gosh, are students going to feel like they need to, go to all these meet and greets? And I do believe that most programs are not doing registration for that specific reason. So there's no list that's being kept of who's coming to what meet and greet. And if there are programs that were thinking about that, I think this very conversation is helping to dispel or kind of discourage programs from having these registration forms, just so there isn't any way for people to feel like, wow, I need to feel pressure to attend all these meet and greets. I mean, there could be 100 meet and greets. So, I totally hear you on this. And the benefit should be for the applicants. This should not be a way for programs to get to know applicants. This is purely for the benefit of applicants getting to know programs. Like, is this a program I want to potentially apply to?
All All right, thank you. And before I move on to some of the other questions, I just want to note that here we have medical students, we have residents, we have established dermatologists, academic and private practice and other. And so please, everyone, feel free to answer some of the questions from your perspective in the chat. We'll also have hopefully a transcript of this as well. Another question that comes up quite a bit, I think, when we interface with students, but also in the chat is what recourse does a student have if they failed one of the stepped exams?
I'm happy to take that question. I really want to focus, so we could talk about step one, and maybe this is an opportunity to talk about kind of a traditional approach to step scoring, but I do want to talk about step 2 CS. Because I really think that this is a step that people have a lot of flexibility in scheduling. Historically, like when I was taking step 2 CS, it was kind of looked at as a test where it was a guaranteed pass. And then a few years ago, they started changing how they score step 2 CS to increase the fail rate. And I've seen students who have outstanding step 1 scores, have done well in their clerkships, and take step 2 CS before their application, like in May or June, because they just want to get it out of the way. And then they fail. And then it's something now that has to be discussed. And I know someone asked the question about how do you address hardships? How do you address these things that are quote unquote red flags? And for a failed step, my approach has been for my mentees, for me to address it in their letter. But for other hardships, I think they're better addressed in a personal statement. The reason I think a failed step is better addressed by a mentor is because that person can speak to that applicant's clinical skills. So if this applicant failed step 2 CS, well, I can say, well, I worked with them in clinic and they were outstanding. I have no concerns about their clinical skills. But then of course you have to rush to retake it. And now it is imperative that you pass step 2 CS before your applications go out. It is important to note that the way that we view applications on our side as a faculty member, when there is a failed step, there is like a big, like literal red flag that says, hey, just look carefully at this person's step report. And so that's why it has to be addressed somewhere. And the good news is I've had mentees who failed step 2 CS and still matched beautifully and still matched at their first choice. But of course, once you have something like that in your application, you have to be very strategic, but you can formulate a good plan to still match. So fortunately, knock on wood, no one that I know who's failed step 2 CS has failed to match. So I don't know if that's me or if that's a testament to my applicants, but I really think it's a testament to the medical students. And really, so many things that I think that you may have heard will like prevent you from applying in dermatology. You can still do, but you have to be intentional about it. You have to be intentional about how you address these things. And you have to kind of make sure that the rest of your application is strong. So that step 2 CS starts to look like an aberration and not a reflection of who you are as an applicant. So we have to really do our best to make it seem like that was a mistake. That does not reflect who this person truly is.
Thank you. And on a similar note, another question we received is, what if I don't match? Or what if I didn't match in dermatology in a previous cycle? What are the options?
I'll take that question. So of course it can be devastating if you don't match, but if you already know that you have some red flags in your application, I always suggest that you plan for plan A, B, and C. So what do some of the plan B and C plans look like? Well, they could be continuing on with your internship year, and then taking time to actually do a dermatology clinical research fellowship in a dermatology department that has very few fellows. So sometimes you just have to, go where there is an opportunity. But the reason why I always suggest looking for programs that have just a few fellows is that because all eyes will be on you. You have a chance to shine at that place. And also making sure that they, in the past, have had their fellows match either there or somewhere else. And that will be a reflection that, yes, they are going to help to assist you to get to where you need to go if you work very diligently. So that's one option. Another option, sometimes people know about issues even well before. And in the past, it became very trendy for people to take a complete year off before they even graduated from medical school to do some sort of significant research, or a year where they would do research in the dermatology department. So that's really up to the individual. But if you decide to do something like that, it really needs to be that you're doing something significant, and that you are really one of the key people who will be writing papers and at the forefront of that research, so that it does not look like the year has been wasted. And also, if you have done another residency like I have, it becomes an even more uphill battle, because Medicare and Medicaid, they actually fund resident training salaries and contributions to the hospital to train you. And they have a rule that once they decide how many years of training they're going to give you, which is determined by the length of your first residency match, then that's it. So now if you've already done a residency, the hospital or the derm program that you're trying to match into not only has to take you as a non-traditional applicant, but also they have to pay to train you. And it costs about, the last time I checked, it was about $250,000 to train a dermatology resident over the course of their time. So it is possible, definitely. You know, some hospitals do get extra funding and they're able to fund people like me, but I would definitely suggest that before you do that residency and you really want to still do dermatology, that you really reach out and consult with some people to make sure that you're making the best decision for you. And the final thing is to really develop your mindset, because you cannot look left, you cannot look right. You really have to keep your eye on the prize and have a good mindset about what you want to do, and also determine how long are you willing to chase that dream. And so those are very real questions that you have to have with yourself. And you just have to make your plan and move forward and find mentorship along the way, and be willing to, do things that you may not have planned on doing, but definitely whatever opportunities you can have to work with dermatologists, to do some research, to get to know people, take it and find out about it and see what happens.
Thank you, Dr. Heath. We have a question about how to approach the personal statement and how to really shine in that way. I haven't heard from Dr. Wall, Dr. Shinkai in a little bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I can start that one. I think the personal statement is valued to different extents in different programs, I would imagine, but I think it's very important to have a strong one nonetheless. For me, the personal statement sort of ties together the rest of the application. So it should be a way to sort of show who you are and your personality. That's not just the sort of the dry statistics of the step 1 score and your grades in medical school and the other bits that come in. For me, I found that I wanted to answer a few questions. I wanted to see, so who is Michael Wall? What is my background? How does that inform my love for medicine and my love for dermatology? What do I bring to the table as a resident in your program? So what are the skills that I possess that you would value and make you want to have me in your program? And then a little bit about why that particular program interests me. And I think if you answer those questions, you really are selling the best parts of yourself to them. In terms of your writing style, you could have a very sort of standard writing style that addresses those things going through. If you are someone who has a bit of a masterful style with language, or you sort of want to get a bit fancy with it, I think that's okay if that's true to who you are. I think the key is to have as many people read it as possible. So have your mentors read it, have friends read it. At the end, they should say, yes, this sounds like something that would come from you. Because when people read this and then they interview you, they want to see that what you have written and the way you have written things is consistent with who you are and how you are when you're speaking with them in person. So it really should be sort of honest to your style and to how you would sort of phrase things. And so I think those things are all important.
Yeah, that was absolutely wonderful. And Michael, I still remember reading your personal statement, which is always the first thing I read in an application. I go to the back and I read the personal statement and I ask, who is this person? Who is Michael Wall, or who is the student who's applying? And, you know, I invite all of you to go back to your med school application and really remember the reasons why you wanted to go to medical school. What were the reasons you wanted to be a doctor? And use that as a starting point and say, okay, that's where I started this journey. And how did I become interested in, why dermatology? How did I become interested in dermatology? And how am I going to be able to manifest my core values as a physician now as a dermatologist? I think that tells a wonderful story. That's sort of first paragraph. Second paragraph would be, you know, what have I done to sort of explore dermatology as a career? What have I learned about clinical dermatology, or if you're so inclined to do a research project, although I want to just mention, if you are not a researcher, I don't feel that you have to do research, because if you have a different passion or project, whether that's social justice or the underserved or whatever you're really into, just be the best at that, and then talk about that and how that work has informed what you might do later on in dermatology. I think it's good to convey what you, as Michael said, what you bring to the table, what you want to get out of residency, what you hope to bring to your residency, how you want to give back to a training program, how you want to give back to either your community or to your patients or in your future work as a dermatologist. And, you know, I really invite you to be personal, but don't tell the most heartfelt thing that you've ever told, because remember, everything in your personal statement is sort of quote unquote fair game for the interview. And if it's just a story that's gonna, you know, wrench your heart in the interview, you may not want to bring it up. So this is just something to maybe show your mentor, some peers, maybe your best friend or your family member or your partner, and really say, like, does this really capture like me? Does this essay sound like me? And how will this really present my path, how I got here and where I'm going? And I think if you stay true to that, you know, keeping a nice balance of personal, but maybe not too personal, I think you can really put your best foot forward and really answer the questions that the program directors are looking for.
And if I just tag on quickly here, Kanade, I'll say that I think that might sound like a lot to accomplish in a page, but I promise you can do it. I remember the personal statement was the toughest part of the application for me, and it took me a while to really perfect it. And I think you will get there after several iterations of trying, sending it to people, having them read it, being very open-minded to their constructive criticism, because again, this is a personal statement, so there might be parts that you feel very attached to that someone might say, oh, I'm not quite sure that story really is flowing the way you want it to flow or is communicating what you want it to communicate. And so I think lots of different drafts over time will get down to that succinct page that captures all of this, even though it might sound daunting to begin with.
Yes, and please don't just have your homegirl read your personal statement who's going to tell you, it sounds great, girl. Please listen to this advice. I put it in the chat, but I just had to say it verbally for people who are not reading the chat. Your personal statement can sink you. I remember maybe 5 personal statements. One of the reasons that I was like, where did Michael Wall end up? And what really wanted him is because he's one of them. He's one of the 5. But please get your feelings hurt if you have to when people read it. It's for your benefit. So I just had to add that.
Thank you all. Actually, there's a question that I think is relevant to all of us in many ways, but particularly relevant to US medical students who are international students, as well as international medical graduates. And that question is regarding visas and the potential availability of visas for this upcoming cycle. I don't know if any of you want to tackle that, but I could start. I was an international, I am I guess I was an international student. I actually have my citizenship interview in a week. Wish me luck. I remember the anxiety of that and the uncertainty of that process. And I think given what's happening in our country over the past couple of months, it actually is a very legitimate concern for people who need to get J1 or H1B visas this year. Unfortunately, that is not up to the programs currently. That is up to the laws of the land. And so even if programs are willing to accept international students, and many of them are, if things are the way they are currently, you simply can't get an H1B visa right now if you're not already in the pipeline. It's quite possible that by the time match comes around in March, that may be different. So it's not a reason to not apply. And that's all that we know at this point. Does anyone else wish to comment about that?
Yes, I too am an international student, currently on a visa, so I can speak to the sort of uncertainty that we are facing at this time. I agree with Dr. Okoye that this should not discourage you from applying. I think one sort of practical piece to keep in mind is what the status of your future visa will mean for your ability to transition to permanent residency or future citizenship. And so really be aware of what that means for J1 versus H1B, for example, and try to see which programs offer which types of visas. That I think, unfortunately for international students, has to be a consideration in how they sort of choose programs to apply to and programs that they wish to rank in terms of thinking of their future, whether they wish to remain in the US or they wish to go back to their home countries. So please do keep that in mind. It's very important.
We have a question here that I think is very important. It happens to come from Dr. Olivia Ware, who will be joining you at UCSF in next 2021. And her question is, generally speaking, we're all taught to stay away from politics and race and these touchy subjects during the interview process. But given our current political climate and dermatology's interest in focusing on diversity, perhaps these topics will come up this year during the interviews. So how do you think applicants should address this, especially when we're not in person and we can't read body language very well?
I think this is a good question and definitely a tricky one, right? Doesn't feel too comfortable. So I would say politics is one of those things that I would guess that your interviewer is not going to delve into that. That's very personal. I would suspect that you won't hear much about politics. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, you're right. Those are some pretty hot topics right now in dermatology, and thank goodness. I mean, we're happy about that, especially with SOX. But I would say one of the suggestions I would have is if it's an interest of yours, if it's something you're committed to, be able to articulate what your experience has been and what you've been able to do to tackle it. So if you're committed to an immigrant population and you've done a significant amount of work, know the statistics, know how we are not serving that population the way we should be, know how dermatology kind of interfaces with that population. Be able to talk about it in a very factual way and be confident. I think that is very intriguing for interviewers. That would be my piece of advice. I'm not sure. I would be curious to hear what others have to say.
I would wonder I think that's a great suggestion. I think a heavy majority of us are not going to have that level of detail. And so I would say stay away from it, because you can't judge a book by its cover. You may feel that you're in a space where someone may have similar political views to you and they may differ. And so I think it's best to appear neutral. Obviously, if someone asks you, are you voting or something like that, just very general kind of innocuous things are okay, but I would really do your best to stay away from anything that could be misconstrued, misinterpreted, and then realize when you have a talk with an interviewer, it's their job to present your responses to the committee, and they could change your answers. They could interpret a certain type of tone because political issues are such a hot button topic, and they may paint you in a light that is not favorable. So I would be, that would be my suggestion, is just to kind of stay away from it unless you have, like Dr. Krieger said, that kind of personal experience that's evident in your application, that you are clearly have very unique information to offer.
Agreed. And I've met a few students over the past couple of years who've mentioned that they've been asked pointed questions about diversity or other things that made them feel like they were put on the spot and they couldn't really win. And I would suggest creating a kind of catch-all answer for uncomfortable things that you can practice with your mentor or your colleague. Something like, that's a really tough question. I don't think there are any right answers to that. And you know, we're all really grappling with these issues, period. That would be my advice.
I also want to say from the perspective of questions that are kind of off limits, I mean, we know as faculty that there are just some questions that are not only inappropriate to ask, but they're actually like we cannot ask. And, you know, one of those things is, you know, what you plan to do with your family. And I think that politics and, you know, questions, it's really unfortunate every time I hear that these questions are asked, because I'm not naive. And I know that no matter what the match rules are and what interview etiquette dictates, that there are people, there are faculty that will go there. And it's sad, and we hope that it doesn't happen, but it does. And I want to just, this is something I always tell my students, is that if there's something that you are not comfortable with, you absolutely have the right to say you're not comfortable with that. And I think that's a hard line. I mean, what Dr. Okoye is saying, I think, is a great way to phrase that, like to have a canned response saying, that's something that's very general. And truth be told, I really don't think that this particularly political questions happen often, because it also puts the faculty member in not a great light. Like if they're going there, they don't, you know, that's not a good look for the program. So I won't say that would not happen, but I do think that if there's a very pointed political question, it is within your bounds to say that is not a question that that you need to answer, or that you feel comfortable answering. And I don't know how everybody feels about that, but that is something that I feel very strongly about really protecting the sanctity of our interviewees and applicants. And so, you know, that's just my feeling on it.
Thank you, Dr. Bowers. There is a burning question I think many students have, and it's come up in the chat, and I've gotten a few private messages about it. And that's basically, what's up with step one, right? What is a good step one score? I'm gonna go out on a limb here in the spirit of transparency, and also because I'm a department chair, so no one's gonna call me tomorrow and yell at me. Take this as my opinion. I'm not speaking for every program, and don't use this against us, but I'm trying to give you a general gestalt for how the score is handled. If you have a score over 245, don't cry. You're good. Okay, you're okay. You generally don't have to talk about the score. If you have a score between 235 and 245, you're still good, especially if there are other parts of your application that really shine, like your clinical performance in medical school. If you have a score between about 220 and 235, the way things are currently, sure, it's a little bit more difficult for you to match, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't apply. Many programs no longer have a cutoff, and so those programs will still see you. The few programs that do have a cutoff, your application will not be seen by those places. If you have a score under 220, again, your odds of matching are lower still, but they're not impossible. I can think of multiple excellent dermatology residents that I have trained over the years who had scores in that range. And so the programs who are interested in holistically reviewing applications do not care what your step one score is. So do not be discouraged from applying based on your score. We don't care. Please apply if this is what you're interested in, this is your passion, and you think that there are other parts of your application that we need to see. Anyone else have any comments?
I agree with that. I think that's a very reasonable distribution. And just, I think that's important to emphasize, particularly for the people who are listening who think that their score automatically disqualifies them. I think a lot of people will be hopefully pleased to hear that even at 220 or even sometimes below, that you're still in the game, right? But that you just have to be intentional about how you apply, and just be prepared.
So we have 10 more minutes for our panel. I would like to give you all a chance to say something that it's a burning piece of advice you just wish you heard as you were going through this process.
This is Dr. Candace Heath again. I guess I really want to speak to the students who come from a medical school or medical school that does not have a dermatology department. We hear you, we see you. Please feel free to reach out. We will do what we can in the Skin of Color Society to help you get matched with projects, etc. But it is still possible, even if you don't have a dermatology program, to pursue dermatology as a career option. So please do not give up hope, and please keep knocking on doors.
Dr. Shinkai, any final words?
I really want to echo that. I think all of us applying in dermatology might feel quite lonely, and that it is an uphill battle. And I really encourage you to really believe in yourselves and to find good mentors to help support you and give you good advice. I don't think you need 10 mentors, but just find one or two that are really going to help you navigate the process. Look at the web. There's lots of great resources on the web at the Derm Interest Group. Different Derm Interest groups have information and little advice guides. The Skin of Color Society has a wonderful advice guide. It just, I believe it's just published in Cutis that came out. Check these things out and really educate yourself. Look to the fourth years ahead of you or the recent graduates from your program, or maybe a resident at the residency program where you're training or nearby where you're training, to get advice, because people want to support you. They want to help you on this journey into dermatology, and the support is out there, but you have to go knocking on doors. They will open.
Thank you, Dr. Shinkai. Dr. Agu?
Yeah, I think, and everybody's advice has been great. Maybe I want to touch on the people who are listening today and they feel like from an academic standpoint, they have, achieved this academic excellence, they've done great research, and just kind of some pearls for them. One thing that I hear occasionally from medical students, and I think Misha Rosenbach at Penn, program director at Penn, actually recently tweeted about this and some of the emphasis that people put on these new Doximity residency rankings. And I want to make it clear, we talk about how hard dermatology is to get into. So sometimes people are just like, well, I just want to get into any place, and then I just want to get into the best place. But we really should focus on like a best fit. So even though you feel like dermatology is super hard to match, you really should, anytime you get an interview, you should know that as far as I'm concerned, everyone who's there at the interview is on an equal playing field. So regardless of your step score, if you were there at the interview, you have just as good of a chance as matching anybody. So you should use that time and opportunity to figure out if that program is right for you. No patient, no one thinks about dermatology rankings or any specialty rankings, right? The best place for you is the place that makes sense for you. And I think the things that play into that are like location, right? Which may be your friends and family, or I will be fully transparent. I was applying as a single woman. And one thing that was very important to me was to be in a city where I may meet other professionals. And I know a lot of other women can identify with this because I talk to my mentees about it all the time, but it's definitely not going to be on the SOX website, right? But everyone has different priorities. So it's not even, you may be interested in melanoma, and there may be someone at an institution that does amazing melanoma research, and you're like, God, I would love to be mentored by them during my residency program, but they're number 13 on the Doximity rankings. Really, I really, really want to de-emphasize a thought process like that, because you have to spend 3 years at your program. You really want to make sure that you're at a place where you're going to feel like you're going to get the most out of your training. You're going to get everything that you're looking for. You're going to be happy. You're going to be with faculty that you enjoy, and you're going to be among similar residents, because each program, I think, has a very unique culture that even though the residents change, that culture generally remains the same from year to year. So please emphasize that, and please know that you do have power even though you are the applicant. So that's the point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Dr. Wall?
I think one thing I want to remind everyone is that, we all struggle with this idea of imposter syndrome. So, when you're applying, things get very hectic. You see the student next to you, you're like, oh my goodness, they have like 100 publications. They know all the good mentors, they have all the connections. I'm never going to make it. What's the point of matching? We all struggle with sort of internalizing this sense that, what we have is not good enough. And I would encourage you as much as you can to let some of that go. It might not be possible to let all of it go, but let as much of it go as you possibly can. You need to go into this process owning your story, owning the fact that you are capable, that you will make a great dermatology resident, and that needs to shine through in your application and in your interviews. And as Dr. Agu was saying, take that agency, take that power. You are interviewing the programs as much as they're interviewing you, and you are trying to find what that best fit is for you. And it might mean that you have just 2 publications in dermatology, or you might have just submitted a couple and not had any at all. It might mean that your step score isn't the best, but you need to realize that there are aspects of what you bring to the table that someone else doesn't bring, and you need that to come through with your application. And that confidence has to come through as well.
Thank you, Dr. Krieg.
Yes, I think just 2 points. One, be yourself. I think we all, like Dr. Agu mentioned, so we want to know who you are, because the match is the match for a reason, and we want to pair the right trainee with the right program, and that's just the beauty of the match. So be who you are, express like what you've been through, your experiences, what you're interested in, and just let your personality and your passions really shine through, and highlight why you want to be a dermatologist. And then second point is, the colleagues that you have now in medical school and those that are applying to dermatology will go on to be your future colleagues in dermatology, right? So rely on them. If you know that someone is really good at the humble brag, ask them to walk you through that. How can I say this in a way that will really shine on my application? Let them teach you. If you want someone to share with you when a certain program is, hey, can you let me know when this person's having their virtual open house? You're always on it with social media. Like, rely on your friends and your colleagues right now, because they will become your derm peers in the future as well.
Thank you, Dr. Krieger. We are down to our final 2 minutes. I just want to say thank you to our panelists. I want to thank the Skin of Color Society and Kimberly Miller and the rest of the staff, Dr. Lynn McKinley-Grant, who's the president of SOX. And it's just been an honor to be here and to share with so many of you. Dr. Heath and Dr. Agu, would one of you close us out? I believe you have some final comments from the Mentorship Committee.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much for attending. Dr. Agu and I have been thinking about this for a while, and we're so glad that so many of you turned out. And we really want to remind you to definitely keep a close watch on your email, on social, etc., for more programs. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Agu.
Yeah, no, thank you to everyone. I want to give a shout out to our chat moderators who've been giving phenomenal advice. I'm not going to remember everybody, but Dr. Ramon Williams has been working hard in the chat. Dr. Donald Glass has been working hard. I see Dr. Janine Luke, who's program director at Loma Linda. I see Dr. Courtney Johnson, who's one of the residents at Johns Hopkins. So many of you guys have been providing, Dr. Peebles, Dr. Glick, so many people. I can't get to everyone, but I just want to thank you so much because I want people to see how invested everyone is, right? A lot of people in the chat have, and not, some of you have been asked and done a wonderful job, but some of those people have not been asked. So I just want to thank you so much for being available to all of the medical students who truly need it and value your advice. So thank you so much. And I just echo what Dr. Heath said, that please be on the lookout. We have more to come, and we're always looking to figure out the best ways that we can help you guys. We're just so eager to see all of your beautiful faces match and become future dermatologists. I think that's it.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.